So hello everybody, welcome back to week 3 of this Introduction to Buddhism course. So yeah, you're very welcome. Hope you had a good week of practice. What we're going to do this evening is, first of all, we're going to check in with each other in breakout groups. And then we'll introduce the theme for tonight, which is Metta, which is the Buddhist word for love and kindness. And then we'll do some meditation. We'll actually explore that in meditation. And then we'll have a break. And after the break, we'll explore that meditation practice a little bit more and then look at Buddhist ethics. And then we'll set up our home practice for this week. So like I said, what we'll do to begin with is we'll move into breakout groups and just report in on how we got on with our practice over the course of the last week. So if you remember last week, we looked particularly at preparation, and we looked at posture, like meditation posture. And we also looked at creating space in our lives by reducing input. So yeah, so the two practices for last week that I was encouraging you to practice at home was, first of all, the mindfulness of breathing, and secondly, exploring 2 different ways of reducing input. So in terms of the questions, just to get you going in the breakout rooms this week. So the first, again, it might be good just to say your name, and then I'll just share these now. So the questions are, so meditation, in terms of the meditation, did preparation and just sitting at the end make a difference? Or what difference did it make, if it made a difference? And how did you reduce input, and what effect did that have? And what challenges did you encounter? So that's just a few questions to get you going in your breakout room. So meditation, did preparation and just sitting make a difference? Secondly, how did you reduce input, and what effect did it have? And thirdly, what challenges did you encounter? So I'll just set those breakout rooms going now. So I'll see you in about 10 minutes. So you've got, there's four in each group, so you'll have about 2 minutes each. Okay, so yeah, welcome back. Hope you had a good conversation in your breakout room. So yeah, just to say, if there are any questions coming out of your breakout room or from your practice during the week, do let me know. You can chat to me in the chat box at the bottom of the screen. So I just want to revisit the idea that we looked at last week, the idea of mind, reactive and creative. And I just want to tell a little story really about how I got involved in Buddhism myself. So when I was in my mid-teens, which would have been in the early 90s in New Zealand, my mother was a great reader. She read a lot. And she read a book about a man who was captured, taken hostage in Beirut when there was the war in the Lebanon in the 80s. And she read a book by a guy called Terry Waite. Some of you might remember that time. And she just told me a few details about that time and that book. So basically, this man, Terry Waite, was taken hostage, and he was literally chained to a wall for several years. And the book describes how he kept himself sane under those conditions. It talks about what he did with his mind to keep himself sane. And he went to the Lebanon to negotiate the release of hostages being held by a jihadist organization. And interestingly, one of the hostages was another guy called Brian Keenan, who wrote a book which you might be familiar with called An Evil Cradling. Brian Keenan is from Belfast. And he also spent a number of years in solitary confinement. So I remember when I heard this story about Terry Waite being chained to a wall and what he did with his mind, I was really fascinated by it, really fascinated by the idea that our mental states, that our thoughts and our emotions don't necessarily need to be determined by our environment. So he was in a very, very difficult environment, very, very painful situation of being incarcerated in that way and being isolated from other people apart from his captors, who wouldn't have treated him very badly. But even then, his mind, the quality of his mind, the state of his mind, he was quite determined that it wouldn't be determined by the situation that he was in, by the conditions that he was in. In particular, it introduced that idea to me that our mind doesn't have to be determined by our circumstances, that there are other possibilities. Particularly, I think what he was emphasizing was that difficult circumstances don't necessarily need to lead to hatred. So we can have some mental and emotional freedom from our environment, which feels like an important thing to remember at this time when a lot of our freedoms are being constricted. It's not quite so bad now. Things are being lifted somewhat, but there's still other anxieties. In some ways, I think for some people, this ending of the lockdown period is even more anxiety provoking than being in lockdown. So again, what we're looking at with mind, reactive and creative is that our experience is not determined by what's going on around us, that we can have some freedom from that. So freedom from the anxiety and fear that we might experience. So when I heard this idea when I was a kid, it made a really big difference to me. I wasn't a very happy teenager. And then a few years later, 5 or 6 years later, I came across a Buddhist centre like the one I'm in now, in the Dublin Buddhist Centre in Wellington. And I heard this idea articulated again, in a way much more fully and much more clearly. And I heard about the idea that I introduced last week of the mind having these two different ways of functioning, a reactive mode and a creative mode. So I thought I'd just read a little bit from a talk that was given by a Buddhist teacher in the late 60s when he introduced this idea. Introduced this way of talking about traditional Buddhist practice by using non-traditional language. So this is what he says about the reactive mind. In the first place, the reactive mind is a reactive mind. It does not really act, but only reacts. Instead of acting spontaneously out of its own inner fullness and abundance, it requires an external stimulus to set it in motion. The reactive mind is, therefore, the conditioned mind. It is conditioned by its object in the sense of being not merely dependent upon it, but actually determined by it. So this is, when you're incarcerated and all you can think of is revenge and hatred and so on, in the example of the confinement that I mentioned earlier. So the creative mind, then, the characteristics of the creative mind are the opposite of those of the reactive mind. The creative mind does not react. It is not dependent on or determined by the stimuli with which it comes into contact. On the contrary, it is active on its own account, functioning spontaneously out of the depths of its own intrinsic nature. So in other words, it functions on the basis of what is really happening in harmony with change. So again, I think this is so important for us to remember that we can be creative in the face of difficulty. And it's so important that in a way, we retain the initiative. So being creative it's necessary to, in a way, retain the initiative to know that we have actually got choices. Maybe our external choices are limited, but the way we respond is, ultimately unlimited. And what we're doing in this course is trying to introduce the means by which we can make that transition. So how we can actually begin to take responsibility for what we can influence. So we can't influence the circumstances around us, but we can have some influence on how we respond, on our own heart and mind, and the actions that come from our heart and our mind. So the last 2 weeks, what we've spoken of on the course is making the transition from reactive to creative through the development of awareness. So developing awareness of what is really happening. And like I said a minute ago, we need to know and feel what is happening, what is really happening, so that we can respond appropriately. So often what we're tangled up with is thoughts about or coming from what's going on. We're not actually in contact with the immediacy, with the directness of what's actually happening. So what we do, the practice that we've been doing is paying attention to the body, which is only really exists right here and now. And as we begin to notice the body, what's really interesting is that we start to notice the mind. We start noticing what's going on in the mind. when we start trying to pay attention to our body. We notice the different impulses, the different desires, the different thoughts, the different emotions that arise in our mind. And there's different possible objects of awareness. So when we practice mindfulness, what we're doing is we're choosing one particular aspect of experience and deciding to stay with that. And of course, when we wander off, we come back. So that's one of the main things that we've been doing. What we're going to do, and what we've been doing is we've been focusing on the body. Yeah, so we've been focusing on meditating on the body. This week, we're going to make a significant shift. We're going to shift from focusing on the body to focusing on others. So we're going to focus our attention on other people. And in a way, we're making a significant shift, not just because we're changing object, but because when we become aware of another person, they're not just another object, because they have experience too. So when we become aware of another person, we're becoming aware of a person who's also aware. So they have experience like we have experience. They have life like we have life. They have pleasure and they have pain. They have disappointment. They have success. And, no doubt they're challenged through these strange and difficult times that we're living through, in the way that we're challenged by these strange and difficult times that we're living through. So that we're looking to develop not just awareness of them as being out there, so to speak, but awareness of the fact that the other person exists from their own side. We're trying to develop an awareness that their life is real. Their life to them is as real to them as our life is to us. So by doing that, we develop this kind of solidarity of life with life, a solidarity of our life with their life. And this awareness, this solidarity, this fellow feeling is a key aspect of the creative mind. It involves a kind of responsiveness to others. And this corresponds to what you could call the love aspect of awakening. So I mentioned over the last couple of weeks that the Buddha woke up to the way things are. He woke up to, well, I've talked about it in terms of change. I've talked about it in terms of a deep awareness. But he also wakes up to the fact of the lives of others. And it's said that at a certain point in his experience of awakening, this great responsiveness arose towards others. The tradition has it, calls it anukampa. It's an ancient Indian word, anukampa, that means something like, it literally means to kind of tremble with or to shake with. So it's as if the Buddha resonated not just with the suffering of beings, but also with their potential. And he saw a vision of all beings as being like lotuses in different stages of development. So a lotus plant, a little bit like our water lilies here, which I just noticed are coming out in the canal up by where I live in Phibsborough. That when they come out of the mud at the bottom of the canal, they kind of come up, and some of them sit on the surface, and some of them break free from the surface. It's particularly the case with the lotus flower, which actually the bloom literally breaks free from the surface. And the Buddha saw that human beings were like that they were in different stages of unfoldment and development, and he could help them to develop, which is why he taught the Dhamma, which is why he gave his teaching. So what we're going to do now is actually just do a little bit of meditation, and we're going to explore this kind of awareness of ourself and awareness of others. So I'll just let you set yourselves up in your meditation posture, and when you're ready, we'll make a start. Just to say, I've got a few questions. I'll deal with them after the meditation. But just to say that don't worry too much about how you're sitting. Someone's asking, is it okay to sit on the floor with your legs straight out rather than legs crossed? So yeah, overall, that's probably going to be okay. It might be less easy to relax, but for now, I'd just go ahead with that. So again, just setting yourself up in your meditation posture. Don't be in a rush. Take the time you need to get comfortable. And just letting yourself relax. So I'm not going to ask you to do anything difficult. I'm just going to invite you to, first of all, just pay attention to your surroundings. To simply notice where you are and what's around you. Noticing sound as well. So trying to really tune in to what sound really is. So trying to let go of what's producing the sound and just notice sound, just the fact of sound. So what is it? What's happening? Where is it coming from? Where do you experience sound? We know that sound is received through the ears, but does it actually feel like that in your experience? And then tuning into your body. So what's happening in your body by way of touch? So beginning by paying attention to your feet. You'll be able to feel the contact that they're making with the floor or with what you're sitting on, perhaps. Sensations of temperature. Bringing your attention to your lower legs. your knees and your upper legs. Again, trying to notice the actual sensation of these parts of your body. So not so much a picture or an idea of the body, but the inner experience of it. The pelvis and the buttocks, the genital region. Being aware of the belly and the movement of your breathing in your belly. What effect does it have on your belly? What about the chest, the rib cage, the back, the shoulder blades and the shoulders, the armpits? So it's as if you're saturating your experience with awareness, really tuning into it by being curious about it. Almost as if you're coming to your experience like meeting someone that you hadn't met before. What are they like? What is your experience like? What about the arms and the hands? So particularly in the hands, there tends to be quite a bit of sensation. So the hands are touching something, they're resting on something. So how does that feel? And there's the neck and the throat. The scalp, the forehead, the face, the mouth. So just letting the face hang. And tuning into the mouth. So the mouth is warm, it's wet. It's also where we experience flavor, taste. And then just tuning into the whole of your body with all its different parts and sensations. And noticing how some parts of our body might feel good. We might feel well. Maybe a sense of just an overall well-being or health. Maybe we feel well rested. Or maybe we feel some pain, a niggle in the body. Maybe we feel a bit short of sleep, a bit kind of ratty, a bit headachy, or even we might even have an acute pain in our body somewhere. Again, there might be an overall sense of well-being or an overall sense of illness. And just being sensitive to that, being sensitive to our experience of pleasure and pain, of well-being or lack of well-being. So we prefer well-being and health and pleasure to illness and pain. So that's just a natural part of being human, a natural part of being a living organism. And we can say to ourselves, may I be well. Just giving expression to our desire, our innate natural desire for well-being and pleasure. May I be well. And we also have a whole range of experiences which are non-physical. We talk about emotion, mind, thought, all these things, impulse, volition. So what are they in your experience? What thoughts are arising in your mind? What's the kind of atmosphere in your mind? Is it expansive or contracted? Do you feel happy or sad? Do you feel anxious or at peace? Again, just acknowledging the reality of whatever's there, being aware of it, open to it. And we experience, or we prefer happiness to sadness. We prefer a feeling of inner freedom to a feeling of inner anxiety or fear. We prefer confidence to insecurity. So again, a deep kind of longing that wells up from the heart. And we can say to ourselves, may I be happy. So this desire for happiness is probably what led you to this course. And we're just sitting with that desire, allowing it to grow within us, the desire for our own well-being. So we can say again, may I be happy. And then letting go of that. And again, just being with what's going on, just relaxing into what's going on without trying to do anything with or to your mind. And then bringing to mind a good friend of yours. So really let them kind of fill your awareness. And there's no right way of doing this. You can bring to mind your friend in any way that you want to. So it might be that you think of the way they look, their face, their eyes, their mouth, the shape of their body, the way they wear their hair, their clothes, and so on. It may be that you think of your friend by remembering the sorts of things that they say, the sound of their voice. You might think of your friend by remembering what it's like to be with them, by the particular qualities that your friend possesses. But in whatever way, just trying to get as vivid a sense of your friend as you can. And notice what it feels like to do that. It's as if you're just there with your friend. And your friend, like you, possesses a body. And in that body arise feelings that are pleasant and feelings that are unpleasant. They experience illness, they experience health. And like you, they prefer pleasure to pain. They prefer health to illness. And we're not only aware of that, but we actually actively wish that person well by saying, "May you be well." So you can say again, "May you be well." Reflecting on the knowledge that you have at some level that your friend exists from their side. They're not just your friend, they're an independent living entity an independent living being with their own experience. They also have a desire for freedom and for happiness. So we can say to them, for them, may you be happy. It's as if we're saying it with our whole body, particularly our heart. May you be happy. And then just sitting, so letting go of trying to do this or that, and just sit. Okay, so we'll take a break now. So we'll come back at 8. It's just 10 to 8. And yeah, if you found a meditation posture that works for you, fantastic. If you haven't, keep experimenting. We'll meditate again later, and do text me questions. I've got a few questions already, which is great, and I'll try and answer them after the break. So anything that arose in relation to your home practice, clarification maybe on something that I've been talking about, any potential applications of the principles I've been talking about that you might be interested in. So anyway, just do please ask questions. And like I say, we'll come back. Actually, let's make it a 2 minutes past 8. So that's a good 10-minute break. Okay, so I'll see you shortly. Okay, so we'll make a start. So as I said earlier, there's a few questions, which is wonderful. So the first question is, what are the benefits of the sitting positions? So the benefit of sitting on the floor, if I've understood your question to mean sitting on the floor, one of them is that because we're closer to the ground, we're kind of more earthed, and actually we're more stable than if we're sitting on a chair. We can kind of let go more deeply. So there's something about being connected to the earth. Actually, weirdly, when you get used to it, it's more comfortable sitting on the floor for longer periods. That might seem strange if you're not used to it, but when you start getting used to it, it starts actually being more comfortable. You can sit for longer periods on the floor than you can sitting on a chair. There's also, there's all sorts of benefits in terms of the openness of the body, the alignment of the body, and so on, that helps the energy kind of flow within the body. And then it's a question, during meditation, is it okay to sit on the floor with your legs straight out rather than legs crossed? So yeah, I answered that briefly earlier. I think, again, it's more, if you can cross your legs or have your feet in that straddling position that I mentioned last week, you'll find it more stable. You'll find your meditation posture more stable than if you have your feet out the front. You'll need to sit with something behind you. Now, again, it all depends on your body. So what you don't want to do is sit in a posture that's so uncomfortable that you can't relax, or that it's so painful that you're just preoccupied with the pain. So this is one of the things where if we had a meditation class, I could actually sort of look at your posture, but it's not so easy to do in an online format. But the last word, I think, on meditation posture is experiment. Just try things out and see what happens. Speaking of, somebody else has asked, does meditation help with chronic pain? And I believe from friends of mine who've got chronic pain and who do meditation that it can help hugely. You might need to meditate in a slightly different way. So I've got a friend, her name is Vidyamala. She's a member of our order. She's also from New Zealand, as it happens. And she's had a number of quite serious back injuries. So she's in pain all the time, and she's developed something called breathworks, which is all about applying mindfulness to chronic pain. And she's written a book. She's written a number of books, actually. One of her books is called Living Well with Pain and Illness. So you might like to look into that book, because there's some really good material on living well with pain and illness. So basically what meditation can help us to do is, and Buddhism generally actually, is to change our relationship to the pain that we feel. So just briefly, one thing we often do is we experience pain. So it might be physical pain, for example, or it might be emotional pain. And then we add another whole layer of other additional pains on top of the first pain. So we might get anxious about the pain. We might think, well, this pain's never going to stop. I'm going to experience this for the rest of my life. And we might add all these other thoughts onto the initial experience, which make it worse, which are the thoughts themselves are also painful. We kind of clench around the pain. So one of the teachings of the Buddha is, well, just experience the first pain. He talked about it as being like being hit by darts, by being hit by an arrow. He says, you will be hit by the first arrow. That's part of having a body, but you don't need to be hit by the second arrow if you're sufficiently mindful and you don't let those reactive thought patterns arise from that encounter with pain. Then you'll be free. So in a way, that teaching of the two darts is a way of talking about reactive mental states. He's like saying getting into a reactive mental state is like being hit by a second dart, that the mental state itself is painful. So I hope that's clear. In what way is sending focusing on the well-being of another person similar or dissimilar to distance healing, or is distance healing contrary to Buddhism? Well, it's similar in as much as you're bringing to mind somebody. I mean, I don't know that much about distance healing. I've never done it or had it done for me, as far as I know. But yeah, it's similar in as much as you're thinking of another person and you're sending them, you're wishing them well. That's the basic gist of the kind of meditation that we're exploring tonight. So it does involve, and this is really key, an effort of, you could say an effort of imagination. That you're really trying to vividly bring to mind that person, really as vividly as you can, particularly remembering that they're alive in the way that you're alive. Yeah, so really remembering that as vividly as you and making that as vivid as you can, and then you're wishing them well. So in a way, that first stage where you're saying "May you be well" is similar to that. You're also wishing them happiness and freedom, even. Which is maybe more thoroughgoing than just physical health, although physical health is not to be sniffed at. So hopefully that answers your question. Um, some people often ask, is it the same as prayer? Is wishing somebody well the same as prayer? And in a way, it's similar in as much as you're wishing somebody well, but you're not calling on any external agent to make that person well. Say, for example, like the idea of God or something like that. You're wishing that person well directly from your own volition. Someone's also saying, yeah, I have found it most helpful setting a time for my meditation. Oh, that's good. Yeah. So it's really, routine is so important, particularly in the initial stages of setting up a practice. Really, in a way, you've been meditating now for 2 weeks. This is our 3rd week of practice. And what you're really trying to do in those throughout the whole practice, actually, for however long it goes, is getting into a habit, getting into a routine, and developing a kind of momentum of awareness. So plugging in at the same time every day will help you to do that. It'll give you that momentum, and then it kind of builds. So if once you've been meditating for a while, the meditation in a way gathers its own momentum. It gathers its own kind of force, you could say. And that continues not just in the meditation practice itself, but in the rest of your life. So you develop this momentum to keep attending to what's really going on and not getting carried away with thoughts and fantasies even about what's going on. So another question. You spoke of change. Within me, there is inner disruption. Is it that this is a natural response and all is well, and let it wash over one? Oh, I just lost I feel the transition you spoke of as a process, and I trust this. Yet in this moment, peace is not a word that comes to mind. Is that feeling of anticipation not comfortable and not uncomfortable? So I suppose, if I've understood you right, what we're trying to do is just develop an okayness with transition, with change. So first of all, when we begin to meditate, we're just trying to notice what's actually there. And what's actually there might be a deep resistance to change. We might feel profoundly resistant to, lockdown easing. We might feel frightened about, if we've got vulnerable health, or those of us who we live with have got vulnerable health, we might feel frightened about that. So we might be resisting the reality of what's going on around us. So first of all, we're just trying to notice that. And acknowledge that that's the reality of our experience, and in a way try and kind of ease that by, first of all, just by being aware of it. We can kind of deepen into what's going on through and with awareness. And like if I've understood you right, peace might be there, or it might be just a sense of being with discomfort. So right now I've had a really, really full couple of days. I didn't sleep very well, so I can feel a kind of tension in my body, and a slight pain in my head. But weirdly, I noticed that when I did the meditation before the break, I actually got really, really into it, despite the fact that I didn't feel terribly good, if you see what I mean. So I think it's important to recognize that, again, to go back to the story of the man being chained to the wall, you don't have to let your immediate experience of pleasure or pain determine what kind of state of mind you're in. So again, you can be in a creative state of mind, even if the external circumstances are quite difficult. Do you have to say it out loud or think about it? Generally, those phrases, you just say them to yourself. You just say, may you be well, to your, as it were, sub-vocally. So you don't vocalize them. You can if you want, if you're meditating on your own. I started doing my meditation sitting on the floor, and I like it better than the chair, but I find it difficult to straighten my back, and I notice by the end it's not straight anymore. Will that change with practice? My posture normally is not straight, so I guess that is affecting my meditation posture. Yeah, so often what people notice when they meditate is they notice what's going on in the rest of their lives. So one thing we notice when we start meditating is we notice how we hold our bodies. So a lot of people actually start trying to do something about their posture when they learn to meditate, like doing yoga, for example, is a really good way of working on your posture. Another thing I'd say is that a lot of people sit too low. They sit too low. And when you sit too low, you have to kind of lift yourself up. So if you are kind of slouching, it's a bit hard to demonstrate with the camera pointing straight at me, but if you can sort of see what I'm trying to demonstrate there, my back's kind of bowing. If you do find that that's happening, try sitting up on something higher. It might feel uncomfortable or a little bit counterintuitive. It might, but just stick with it. You might find that actually that's the answer to your difficulties with posture, is sitting on more height. Oh, good. That's great, Geraldine. Oh, yeah. So someone's asking me about pain. So yeah, the book is called Living Well with Pain and Illness. And the woman's name is Vidyamala. I'll just write that in the chat because it's a bit of an unusual name. That's her name, Vidyamala Birch. Maybe Daniel, could you send me a message to email people the link to that book? That'd be handy. Okay, so thanks for the questions. That's great. I think that's everything. So what next? So yeah, so basically, so what we heard about, or what we did earlier, is we did 2 stages of a 5-stage practice, and it's a practice whereby we actively cultivate that ability to feel for another person. We develop that imaginative identification with another person or with many other people. And again, what we're trying to do here is we're working with our habits of mind, particularly working with our habits of how we relate to people in a kind of unthinking and reactive kind of way. We're working with our relationships with people that we like, people that we're indifferent to, and people that we find difficult, and then actually everybody. And the meditation that we're going to do is particularly geared towards overcoming hatred. So hatred or aversion or ill will, all the resentment, all these different mental states are some of the most, well, probably the most harmful mental states that we inhabit as human beings. They certainly lead to the harm for others, but they also lead to harm for ourselves. So if you're in a state of resentment, for example, it's very, very difficult to be happy. It's almost impossible, actually. I'd say it is impossible to be happy. So if we really want to be free, if we want to experience well-being, if we want to experience peace of mind, we really have to get to grips with the tendency that we have to ill will. It's really, really key. And actually, it's ill will and difficulty in communication that causes so much of the more acute suffering in human life. I was just listening to the radio this morning, and they were saying that the incidence of domestic violence has increased by quite a large, by I said 39% this morning in the lockdown. So that's serious pain, that people getting into conflict with each other and that being expressed in violence. So it's the cause of so much of our suffering as human beings. It might not be as acute as actual physical violence. That's obviously the more extreme expression of aversion, but it might be more subtle, of just resentment or cutting speech or all kinds of things. It might be grievances that have gone back a long way in our life that we keep returning to. So if we really want to be happy, if we really want to be free, we need to get to grips with this tendency towards ill will. And this is a meditation practice that actually helps us overcome that. And again, we can't make life so that we never encounter difficulty. We can't make our life so that we never encounter people that we're going to find difficult or painful. But what we can do, again, is we can learn how to be creative in the face of difficulty. And again, this is what this meditation practice particularly teaches us how to do. So the practice is called the Metta Bhavana, and I'll so Metta Bhavana, it's written at the top of your screen there. So Metta is the Buddhist word for this development of an attitude of well-wishing towards others and oneself. Bhavana means development. So Metta Bhavana, you could say, is the development of love and kindness. And in the practice, what we do first of all is we try and connect with our own desire for well-being. So we've all got this sort of self-cherishing, which is a deep aspect of our experience of being alive. In a way, it's what makes us do everything that we do. We really deeply want to be happy. We deeply want to be fulfilled. And what we do in the first stage is we just try and connect with that. This is what we did earlier. It's just try and connect with the fact that, yeah, I much prefer pleasure to pain. I much prefer well-being to illness. I don't want to get COVID-19, because it's going to be painful, aside from it being potentially fatal. So we just identify with that really, really deep desire, you could say, just for life and for fulfillment. And then we recognize, we bring to mind a good friend, and we recognize that they want that as well. So that's what we did before the break. We brought to mind a good friend, and we recognize that they want for their own well-being as we want for our own well-being. It's generally relatively straightforward to do that because they're a friend. What we're trying to do it in a way is to wish that person well for their own sake. We all like to have friends which are happy, but in a way we're trying to wish them well for their own sake, not because they're going to be a happy person for us, if you see what I mean. So that's the kind of deeper level of practice. In the third stage, we bring to mind a neutral person. So a neutral person is someone that we don't have a strong response to. We neither particularly like them or particularly dislike them. They're neither friend nor foe. So this is probably going to be someone that we don't know very well. Yeah. So a friend, an acquaintance, or maybe a family, an in-law or something. Someone we just don't really have a strong feeling for. It might be someone that we buy our milk or bread from, or someone that we see. Like I've been walking up and down the canal close to where I live, and there's a guy who always goes for a jog when I go for a walk. And I've seen him every day for about the last 8 or 9 weeks, actually. And so I don't know anything about him. I know, what he looks like. I know the way he runs. But apart from that, I don't know anything about him. So he's a sort of perfect person. His life overlaps with mine, but I don't have a particularly strong feeling for him. And then what we do is we bring that person to mind. And again, it's really important to bring them to mind as vividly as we can. And we try and have that same attitude of well-wishing towards them, trying to remember that they want for their own well-being in the way that we want for our well-being. And so what we're trying to do is overcome indifference in the third stage. So in the fourth stage, we bring to mind someone that we find difficult. So it's someone whose life impinges on ours in a way that we find painful. So it might be somebody who's just kind of difficult, they just kind of rub us up the wrong way. It's not so much that they're difficult in and of themselves, it's that we find their company or their behavior painful. That's the key thing. Traditionally, this is spoken of as the stage of the enemy. I don't suggest that when you first start doing the practice, you bring to mind an enemy. It might be a little bit too much to manage. But later on, it's really important to bring to mind your enemy. People maybe even trying to harm you. And again, what you're trying to do is develop this capacity to experience that without generating hatred, which doesn't mean that you're becoming a doormat, actually. Sometimes it can sound as if you're just letting people do whatever they want to you, but you're not doing that. Actually, metta involves a deep attitude of dignity and self-respect. So it might be that, because of your metta for yourself, you stand up to somebody who might be treating you poorly, but you're not doing that out of hatred. You're doing that out of self-respect, which is quite a different thing. So this doesn't mean, metta doesn't mean weakness. It actually means strength, because again, you're trying to develop this ability to be creative in the face of adversity, which is always going to make you stronger than than reacting to adversity. So I think that's quite important, particularly in these times of, when you look at the violence erupting in America, for example. So important to resist oppression, but not doing that in a way that just adds more violence into the kind of human situation. So I think that's quite important just to mention that. In the fifth stage, so the fourth stage is about overcoming the propensity to hatred, for developing hatred. So it's a really powerful practice that goes right to the heart of some of the most difficult aspects of human emotion and human behavior. So in the fifth stage, what we do is we equalize our metta to each person. So in other words, we hold each of those four people in our mind and wish metta towards each equally. So may each person be well and happy, may they be free, and so on. And then we radiate out to include more and more people. So traditionally what you do is you just start with people that you know, that are in your immediate circle, and then you'd extend out from there. So the idea is that it becomes a kind of radiation of metta, that you're sort of, just radiating metta out, particularly from the heart, so that the sort of center of the practice is the heart area. It's not just about thoughts, it's about emotion. It's even about volition. It's about what you do with your mind, what direction your mind is moving in. Okay, so that's just an explanation of the practice. What we'll do now is we'll actually have a go at it. So if you'd like to set yourself up for meditation, and when you're ready, we'll make a start. So we're going to begin with just tuning into your own body. And the sensations in your body. And whatever your experience is okay. It's your starting point. So don't worry about not being in a good state to meditate. Whatever state you're in, that's a good place to start. And in fact, that's the only place we can start. So we're trying to open up to what's actually there, rather than wish ourselves into some other kind of mental state. So what do you feel right now? Particularly in your immediate physical experience. Noticing your mind as well, the atmosphere of your mind. So what is that? What's happening there? And before you even start, just having a kindly attitude to whatever's going on. And remembering that it's kindness for yourself that brought you to this course, that made you engage with this course. So it's already there. We're just opening up to it, allowing it to flower more fully. This self-kindness, this kindness for the self, for ourself. Or metta, as we call it. And we can evoke metta for ourselves simply by saying to ourselves, may I be well. So saying the phrase to yourself and just letting it resonate. May I be happy. May I be free from suffering. May I grow and develop. So just saying the phrase to yourself and sitting with it, sitting with the intention that the phrase expresses. And then just sitting, so just being with yourself as you are. No particular effort or focus required. And then bring to mind a friend. So choosing one particular person and bringing that person to mind as vividly as you can. So that may be by thinking of them in your mind's eye. It may be you think of their voice or the way that they communicate. A memory of being with that person. So just trying to evoke their particular character, their qualities. And they really do exist from their side. They have a body as we have a body. And so you can say to your friend, may you be well. Sitting with that wish, that intention, that desire for their well-being. May you be happy. Saying that to your friend. May you be free from suffering. And then letting your friend move into the background. And again, just sitting with yourself, feeling what's going on in your belly, in your heart. And then bring to mind a neutral person. So choosing one person and deciding to remain with them for the next few minutes. And don't worry about finding somebody absolutely neutral. What you're trying to do is choose somebody who you neither have a strong responsive attraction or aversion for. And again, bringing them to mind as vividly as you can. Calling them by their name if you know their name. And again, they have a body, so you can be absolutely sure of that. You don't know probably much about them, but you know that they have a body, and therefore they experience pleasure and pain. So you share that with them. So, in the same way that you want for your well being and pleasure, so do they. So you say, may you be well. May you be happy. And then letting that person too move into the background, just resting your awareness in your body, letting go of any strain in the face, in the shoulders, in the belly. And then bring to mind someone that you find difficult. Again, bring them to mind as vividly as you can. And notice how it feels as you do that. Try and stay with the immediate feeling of it. That might feel painful, disappointing, or even stressful. But just try and stay with that feeling in the body, in the belly, in the heart. So that person is more than what you find difficult about them. And remembering that person exists from their side, and they have a body like you do, and you say, because of that, may you be well. May you be happy. So you don't pretend to like them if you don't like them. You're simply including them in your well-wishing, just because they're alive, because they're a human being as you are. And then including in your metta, your friend, the neutral person, yourself, and a difficult person. So may we all be well and happy and free. Then including your family, So just letting that metta, that attitude of well-wishing, include members of your family and also your friends. Allowing friends to come to mind naturally. And then including all the other people, or at least some of the other people that you come into contact with in the course of your life, whether in person or online. Eventually including all human beings and all living beings of all kinds. So may all beings dwell in happiness and well-being and freedom. And then bringing the meditation to a conclusion. So I wanted to share now just a little. This is another little story from somebody in prison. This time it's a little quote from Oscar Wilde, the famous Irish writer who was put in an English jail in the 1890s. And this is a little piece of writing that he wrote, and I just wanted to read you a little bit from it. It's basically he's examining his life before he was in prison, and he's expressing some regret. He says, every little action of the common day makes or unmakes character, and that therefore what one has done in the secret chamber, one has someday to cry aloud on the housetop. So every little action of the common day makes or unmakes character, and that therefore what one has done in the secret chamber, that's the secret chamber of one's heart, one has someday to cry aloud on the housetop. So what this means is that our state of mind expresses itself in action, and our actions refashion our mind. So when we meditate, we're really taking responsibility for that. We're really taking responsibility for our mind, and that we act with our mind. What we do with our mind has an effect. It's expressed in terms of what we say and what we do. And what we do and what we say, in turn, affects the way that our mind is. It affects the way that we are. It affects our character, as Oscar says. So in order to really develop, in order to make this transition from reactive to creative, we really start needing to look at our behavior as well as our mind. Otherwise, what's going to happen is that we're going to undo the good work that we've been doing in our meditation and the rest of our life. So if we lose our rag, if we get really angry and pissed off, we're going to be undermining the metta that we're going to be trying to cultivate when we do this practice, the metta bhavana. To put it in a more positive way, if we act out of kindness and generosity and so on, we're going to be strengthening that intention to act for the well-being of others. We'll develop that intention, we'll strengthen it, we'll make it stronger. So every action that we do, according to the Buddha's teaching, refashions character. That's what Oscar saw when he was reflecting on his own experience, that every little action of the common day makes or unmakes character. And the Buddha says something very, very similar. He says that just as a way that a pail is filled with water that's dripping, so drop by drop, a bucket fills, so our mind is filled with good or filled with harmfulness. So we really need to think about that. We really need to give some attention to that if we're going to make this transition from living in not just thinking and emoting, but living in a creative as opposed to a reactive way. So other people are part of our life, we are part of their life. And what we're trying to do when we act ethically is to act from that awareness, act from that knowledge that other people's experience is real. So making this transition to living from that truth is really what Buddhist ethics is about. It's about seeing how we can act reactively or creatively in terms of what we say and what we do. The more traditional way of expressing reactive and creative is in terms of skillful or unskillful and skillful behavior. This is skillful and unskillful translates the term kusala or akusala, which are the original terms in the original languages. And it really does mean when we're acting ethically, when we're thinking about acting ethically from a Buddhist point of view, we're really thinking in terms of becoming more skillful. So what that expression skillful suggests is a training. We're trying to acquire a skill. So that's very much the kind of emphasis in the Buddhist tradition is about that ethics is about acquiring a skill, the skill to be kind and generous and so on, not about being good or bad, or getting the rules right or breaking the rules. It's about learning a set of principles and applying those principles in the different circumstances of our life. So this ethical life that I'm talking about, this way of making or unmaking character through what we do and what we say, is usually expressed in terms of a number of training principles. They're often called precepts, and there are 5 of them in Buddhism that cover the most fundamental ethical areas. And I just want to introduce them now before we close. We'll return to them during the course of this course. We've actually looked at them already, and I'll point that out as we go through. So the first precept is basically expressing metta, what we've just heard about, this identification, imaginative identification of self with other through what we say and what we do. It's kindness, you could say. It's trying to live from kindness. One simple way of appreciating that or thinking about that is just simply noticing who we're with, really paying attention to them, really listening to them. What it means negatively is not harming other living beings. So it's not just that we're trying to be creative, we're also trying not to be reactive. So one of the most egregious expressions of harmfulness reactivity is harming other living beings through what we do. That can be gross, it can be subtle, there's so many different ways we can do that. So we're trying not to do that. We're trying to restrain ourselves from doing that. And again, in Buddhism, there's a positive sense of restraint, that if we're doing something that we know is going to be harmful, we try and restrain ourselves from that. And the more we do that, we'll weaken our propensity to be harmful. So that's the first precept, the precept of metta and abstaining from harming other beings. The second precept is the precept of generosity. So this is basically not just a wish for the well-being of others, but actively giving them what they need to be well. So having again, it's that like at the end of the Metta Bhavana there, it's that sort of outward going attitude, that sense of expressing that solidarity through gifts, through actually giving people what they need, not just material gifts. Again, it could be listening to somebody. It could be giving somebody the gift of fearlessness, of just being confident when they're not confident. The negative side of that is taking is abstaining from taking the not given. So not taking things that aren't freely given to us. So you notice the spirit of it is really, really important. So it's undertaking to abstain from taking the not given. It's not stealing, because that can get kind of legalistic, but it's about the spirit of not taking something that hasn't been freely given to you. So that's the second precept. We'll look at that more next week. The third precept is contentment. So this is learning how to be contented, to enjoy simple things, not out of a sense of piety, but out of a sense of wanting satisfaction and fulfillment. So we're kind of told, we're kind of fed this narrative that we'll be happy when we get what we want. But if you think about it, if you reflect on it, often it doesn't work. So we're not happy when we get what we want, because the wanting itself just perpetuates. So it's a much more profound thing to learn to derive happiness from within. And that's very much what the Buddha teaches, to be happy in and within ourselves. And when we experience meditative absorption, for example, we experience that directly, of the mind being kind of content and whole within itself. The other side of that is sexual misconduct. So very often when we're not contented, we attach our sense of what will make us happy onto sexual relationships of some kind. So basically, another way of thinking of it is sexual misconduct is harming other people through our sexual behavior. It's plain and simple, really. Just to say, there's no hang-up in Buddhism about same-sex relations. It's what this precept is about is not harming other people through our sexual behavior, whatever that is. The fourth precept is about what we say. It's about how we communicate, and it's about communicating truthfully. It's about being a whole person, being the same person in different scenarios, in different situations, having integrity. So it's quite a deep thing. It's not just about reportage, although that's very important, reporting the facts right. But it's about being the same person with different people, which and it of course means abstaining from false speech, deliberately trying to mislead people. The fifth precept is a precept of awareness. So that awareness we're trying to cultivate in meditation, particularly in the mindfulness of breathing. We try and bring that outside of the meditation so that we're really aware of what's going on. We're not distracted and lost in secondary and proliferating thoughts, but really acutely aware of what's immediately going on. And one of the things that undermines that is drink and drugs. So we bring some attention to the fact that if we take a lot of drink and drugs, that's going to stop us from being aware. So the other part of that precept is bringing some attention to that. So that's just a very brief overview of 5 of the most important ethical precepts in Buddhism. And we've already looked at, in the first week, we looked at awareness. We looked at trying to cultivate awareness by paying attention to washing our hands. In the second week, we practiced the third precept by reducing input, which is one really good way of cultivating contentment. The practice for this week is the first precept, and what I'm going to be encouraging you to do is, it's actually the second point on the screen there, is to give your attention to the person that you're communicating with. So whether you're paying attention to somebody, talking to somebody online or in person, really trying to give them your full attention. I noticed that particularly online, it's quite easy to kind of not do that because the person can't see you sometimes, or they can only partially see you. You can kind of do something else as well as talking to the person. So it's really, really good to make a practice of actually, if you're going to talk to somebody online, give them your full attention. If you meet someone, we can meet each other now. To turn your phone off just so you can give them your full attention and really look at them when you're with somebody. Really try and be with them as fully as you can, and that's an expression of the first precept, the precept of metta or kindness. And the other practice for this week is to meditate every day again, and to do 2/3 metta bhavana to 1/3 mindfulness of breathing. Yeah, so have a do if you're going to meditate 6 times, do the metta bhavana 4 times and the mindfulness of breathing once. If you've got time, by all means, do both practices every day. That you'd really get a good run at it then. But it's a new practice, and I think it takes a bit of getting used to. Don't worry about getting it right. Don't worry if you're a bit distracted. You're really just trying to develop the habit of meditating at the moment. And yeah, don't worry about it being all neat and tidy. It'll probably be a bit messy, but it's just what you're trying to do is just keeping on coming back to developing the habit of opening to whatever arises in your experience with kindness. That's really what the practice is about. So just to remind you that we're running all of our events on a donation basis at the moment. So if you'd like to make a donation, that would help us continue the work that we're doing. And next week, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at the second precept. We're going to be looking at generosity and what that means, and also how that's connected with the deepest insights of Buddhism, of not self. So we'll hear about what that means next week. If you've got other questions, please hang on afterwards. Other than that, we'll see you next week. Okay, see you later.